Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. Well, I think it's safe to say that we have now entered the next phase of public school brainwashing. It might be tempting to feel like I'm preaching to the choir when I talk about things like public school brainwashing, because I know that if you're watching this video, you are likely already homeschooling your kids. But I think that it's important enough that if even those of us who do not have our kids in school, if we know enough about what is going on, we can at least inform our friends and family members who do have kids in school who aren't really aware of the sort of stuff that goes on. And yeah, I think it's safe to say that one of the main purposes of school from the start was indoctrination. And yeah, you could even go so far as to call it brainwashing. And while I am certainly no expert in history, I'm not a historian, but I have studied enough of the history of the public education system to see where this is going and how the different steps of indoctrination or brainwashing have been put into place as time goes on. Now, the very first thing that I want to say is that I am not saying that the people who are teachers are somehow in on this, because they are very likely unaware of what is happening while they are working in these schools, kind of like with the hidden curriculum, that John Taylor Gatto wrote about. Most of those teachers weren't really aware of the hidden curriculum. They weren't aware of their role in it, but that doesn't mean that this stuff doesn't exist. So I thought that it was important to at least go over what I have observed over the years of public schooling through my reading. Obviously, I haven't been alive through all of public schooling. I'm not that old, but and I can see how the different stages have taken form. And yeah, we really have right now, during this pandemic time of when the kids are all now going back to school with all of these new CDC guidelines, pretty scary if you think about kids going back to school with the guidelines they have nowadays, which we will be talking about then. But that's just the latest rung in the ladder. So the first one that I have taken notice when compulsory schooling or when public education first started, the brainwashing mechanism was geared towards consumerism. So by taking kids out of their family homes where they were likely learning useful skills, they were learning the family trade, they were learning all of those things that you needed to be a self-sufficient family. And those skills were kind of just erased from memory after a couple generations went by, because kids weren't home anymore to learn these things. And what they did learn was how to buy, because everybody was, working in factories at that point. Well, most people, obviously not everybody. They needed people to run those factories. And in order to make any money off of those factories, they obviously had to have things to sell in those factories. And people aren't going to buy things if they're self-sufficient, at least not the way that we see people buying things nowadays. If people know how to do things on their own, that's exactly what they're going to do. But that wasn't useful for the people during the industrial age. They needed generations of people. They needed a populace who was going to not make all those things for themselves, not be self-sufficient, and was going to earn them money by buying. So that was kind of the first rung in the ladder, was gearing these students towards consumerism. So then after that took hold, and after a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers no longer had the skills that their ancestors or even their very close relatives like grandparents may have had. So the next step was, I call it separation. This step is when it became normal to begin thinking of the school as maybe your extended family. And this is something that goes on even today. We see a lot of people really push this aspect, but it really started after the consumerism phase, when they wanted people to be okay with the fact that the family wasn't central anymore. They kind of undermined the importance of the family unit, and what they did was they made, Parents think that it's okay if their kids are with strangers all day long. Moms, it's okay if you go out and if you work all day long, and if if your kids come home and sometimes you're not even there, because they have those caring adults with them throughout their school day. So that was the next step, was kind of the undermining of the family, making the family seem like at some points that it was a necessary evil. I've talked several times about how when my kids were in school, I really did feel like a secondary parent. I felt like I was answering to the school instead of them answering to me. I felt like they were telling me how to raise my children instead of me telling them what my expectations were. And that is really what happened. Parents were made to feel less like parents and more maybe like the secondary family that I felt like. So then after that process was taken care of, and again, this is all ongoing. This does never stop. They just kind of keep adding more rungs to the ladder. The next one was academic revision. Not only did they start changing history, they started changing the things that were being taught in school, but they started changing the way they were teaching things in school. They started dumbing down the population, because an ignorant population is so much easier to control. If people do not have the ability to think for themselves, it's a lot easier for you to just tell them what to do, pat them on their head, and send them on their merry way. And you don't have to worry about them, saying, well, that doesn't make sense, or why do I have to do this? Because if they are trained in the proper way while they are in school, they are going to learn to submit to authority, to submit to their superiors, and to always have the mindset that someone smarter than them already figured things out. So there's really nothing that they themselves have to do. In the process, these kids no longer have the ability to think critically, and they don't have the ability to actually research things. Very, very often you see that people will just accept what one of our leaders tells them, or someone again who knows more than they do, what they tell them, and they will accept it at face value, whether it makes sense or not. And this is that's why I call it brainwashing, because it makes no sense. It has absolutely no I lost my train of thought, but it makes zero sense in the way that things are presented. They will just accept things that are being told to them, and it doesn't matter how outlandish it is, it doesn't matter how strange it sounds, as long as someone who is up there, who is one of those technocrats, told them something that they're supposed to learn, they're going to accept it. And that's something that we see happening nowadays a lot. So this aspect of it has really ramped up in the recent years, but that doesn't mean that this is where they've stopped, because the next rung then is moral indoctrination. And I think we see that going on in a lot of schools nowadays. They no longer believe that it is the family's job to teach their children morals. They want teachers to be teaching morals to the children. And not only the teachers, it's not specifically the teachers, although in a lot of cases the teachers are putting their own point of view into things. Believe you me, they're doing that. But a lot of these school districts are starting to push things that really do go against what a parent would want to be teaching to a child. They are pushing these things on these kids at school. They are completely changing the fabric of our society by bringing down our moral values. So when you hear things like social emotional learning, your ears should perk up, because that is what this is. That is that moral indoctrination that is now going on in the schools. And I have to add that I just finished the book, Whoever Controls the Schools Rules the World, and that really is true. The things that are being taught in school, they do weave the fabric of society. They do determine the outcome of a civilization, and that's why I think it's so important that we start educating people on what is going on in schools, because the more kids that we send to these schools and get indoctrinated, and let's face it, this is extreme indoctrination at this point. Our country, as of right now, it doesn't look even similar to what it did last year. It's crazy. It is only going to get worse. We have got to wake people up and let them know what is going on, what is happening to their children while they are within those four walls of the school. And So now we are at the latest phase, and I'm going to call this the distrust phase, the do not trust your neighbor phase, because now we have these CDC guidelines coming into the schools where kids are going to have to likely wear masks in school. They are going to have to practice social distancing, that buzzword that everybody loves to repeat constantly to the point that it drives you crazy. That's neuro-linguistic programming, by the way. So I've seen pictures of children in playgrounds where they have spray painted circles, one child per circle, and the circles are like spread really far apart, and that's what the kids do. They sit there in their little social distancing circle. And unfortunately, a lot of schools aren't even going to be allowing recess time. So those social distancing circles, I'm sure they're going to likely be in the classroom as well, because kids are not going to be allowed to be near each other. They're obviously not going to allow any sort of physical contact. And you know, in some aspects that might be a good thing when you've got things like bullying going on, although I don't think that the CDC guidelines are going to deter them very much. But at the same time, kids are going to start to feel estranged from one another. And as human beings, we need to feel that personal attachment to other people, whether you're at school, whether you're at home. If your kids are being brought up in an educational establishment where they're constantly afraid of each other, you know, you have to wear your mask or you're going to get someone sick, or someone else is going to get you sick. Oh, don't touch someone because they might get you sick. That's the whole mindset that is going on to these kids nowadays with the temperature checks. And I've heard that some schools are going to be doing COVID testing. And this all brings in this aspect of paranoia. These kids are going to be raised in an environment where they are literally paranoid of their fellow man. They're afraid everyone is going to get them sick. They don't want to go near anybody because going near someone can get you sick. Don't take that mask off and have, be able to see someone's actual facial expressions because they could get you sick, especially if they're not wearing a mask. This is not right. Someone on Instagram today wrote about how she had her kids at a park and there were other kids there and her kids weren't wearing masks, and some other kids who were at the park who were also not wearing masks asked their parents if they could come over and play with her kids, and the other parent said, "Oh no, there's too many people in that group. They could get you sick." And and then someone else said to them that they weren't wearing masks. They could get coronavirus from them because they weren't wearing masks. And that is really what is going to be going on in these schools. Children are going to, you talk about socialization. One of the biggest arguments that people who send their kids to public school use is socialization, because that's just one of those myths that just perpetuates no matter how untrue it is. But now, what about socialization in school? It is going to be completely non-existent. And not only are these kids no longer going to be interacting with their friends and their teachers in a healthy way, they're going to be afraid of them. And is that really what they're trying to make us do? Are they trying to isolate us from one another so that we, as a people, don't try to come together and stand against them? That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram, because I think YouTube started disabling my comments again. I never know. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.